weird being on stage, all these headphones, and I don't have them on, so there's a little bit of a sensory dissonance here. But I just want to say hello, welcome everyone. Just before I do a bit of introduction and a talk, I just want to welcome everyone into presence here and now. So with that, I'm just going to ask you to close your eyes and put your hands on your thighs. That's a small act of embodiment. That's a small act of being here now. If I sound a bit loud, that's because... But just close your eyes with me. Put your hands on your thighs. Feel the musculature under your thighs. Put your phone down for a few seconds. Take a deep breath in, pulling through the center line of your body. And let it go with a little bit of a sigh. And when you're ready, open your eyes. I'm going to be talking to you today about living longevity. It's this concept that a lot of us miss, actually, in this world of longevity. When I ask people what longevity is, they're often like, well, it's NAD, it's biohacking, it's red light, it's hyperbaric oxygen. And what I see in clinical practice, just to introduce myself, I'm a medical doctor about 21 years now, trained in King's College in London. I hold a Bachelor of Science in Neuroscience and the Biology of Aging, way before it was sexy to study aging. And I founded a concept called Wellgevity some 9 years ago now. And more recently, this BioHarmony method, which I'm going to be talking about. I was part of the founding team at RoseBar at Six Senses Ibiza, where I learned a lot about the methodology and the concepts I'm going to talk to you today about. And when I say living longevity, we run retreats all around the world with a strategic group of wonderful practitioners. So a little bit about me. This is a pretty gnarly photo, but in 2014, that's a few years ago now, I won Ironman UK. And the only reason I'm going to talk to you about this is because that world immersed me in a world of performance, of biohacking, a long time before we reached the stage today. I was friends with Ben Greenfield. We did all the hacking. We did all the blood testing. We did everything to kind of shift zones so that we could optimize performance. And some of it worked. But one of the points I want to make, when I did this Ironman UK, I'd never run a marathon. And you actually run a marathon at the end of the event. You do a 3.8K swim in some horrid lake or water vat. And then you do 180 kilometers on a bike, which is a long way. And then you get off the bike and you have to run a marathon. And when I got off that bike, I was in the lead, and people were, I just had this sense of overwhelm of, oh my goodness, I just did something quite crazy, but I still have a marathon to go. And the reason I mention this is because how you think and what you think is possible, mind over matter, we often talk about it, but it really is true. Being in the moment of possibility, shedding the doubts, staying in that process was very much what really helped me. And also the guy you can see on the bike who was sort of speaking into my ear, going, you can do this, just one aid station to one aid station. Forget about the distance. And what I mentioned at the bottom here is that you can have ideal blood work. You can go to SynLab or some of the Aware Labs or any of these companies, and you can have a perfect profile of health. In fact, you can be optimal. You can have high testosterone. You can have high or optimal iron. But you can still be a little bit broken inside. Your nervous system can still be on fire. And as I'm going to teach you, there's no free lunch, and it will catch up with you at some point. So we're trying to be proactive. So this is the finish line where I couldn't quite believe what happened. Talked a little about this, but the reason I put this up is not to celebrate glory. It's because when I fell to my knees at the end, I had this overwhelming sense of wow, I just did something quite crazy. But the people I loved weren't at the finish line. My mum wasn't there, my dad wasn't there, my partner wasn't there. All the people that mattered weren't there. So in that moment, when I was unbeknowingly a day pregnant, I was sharing all of the validation from the crowd that was with me at the time. But I felt pretty broken, and it took me a while to recover. And the reason I've mentioned this is because I looked like the pinnacle of fitness. Somehow my body managed to get pregnant at 9% body fat. But I was having night sweats, I was exhausted, my nervous system was pretty on edge. And what I've written on the left-hand corner there, that real resilience as we're going to think about today, is flexible. It's not found in rigid protocols. It listens, it adapts, and it's not about pushing harder. It's not about this concept that many of the biohacking world portray, and I myself lived, is this TTFU, toughen the F up, and no consequence, just keep doing, keep pushing through. There is always a consequence. So this was my consequence, long COVID. In March 2020, I was in London. I was working in a clinic. I was taking blood for some patients. There were a lot of people coughing on me. I was like, this is a bit weird. And they said they'd just come back from Italy, skiing. Anyway, 48 hours later, exactly, 48 hours later, I had huge fever. I had awful gut symptoms. And I was like, this is weird. And then the press started to talk about this concept of this virus that had come over from China. And I was, quite frankly, quite terrified. I took out of London. I was ringing the ambulance, and they wouldn't take anyone at that point. It was a bit like, we don't know what to do with you. I went to hide in Devon with my daughter, which is where I grew up, in the countryside in England. And I developed full-blown pneumonia. I developed full-blown blood clots in my lungs, in my hands, in my feet, in my womb. Basically, the whole body started clotting. In some people, it did. I developed inflammatory arthritis. I was basically completely broken. I was in and out of hospital. No one really knew. And as many of you know now about long COVID, it's a disease of the system as a whole, and it affects different people in different ways. But it took me to breaking point, but it also took me into a period and an era of curiosity, of thinking, why is the medical system not able to fix this, right? They were giving oxygen, putting people on CPAP machines, and it was killing them because it wasn't a problem with not the oxygen, it was the problem with the blood flow being able to supply the lungs. The photo here is your lungs, and it's showing the residual damage. In many people, you get this persistent fibrosis, which is thickening of the tissue post-COVID after the inflammation. So the reason I'm mentioning all this is because before this all happened, like many athletes, I was like, well, look how fit I am. You know, on paper, I've got all these metrics. I can run a marathon. I can win an Ironman. But at the end of COVID, I couldn't even walk to the door. I had to ask for a wheelchair to get on a plane, to go to a clinic, to heal, to pay a vast amount of money in Germany because no one in England knew what they were doing at that point. So the point is here that we do have to build a body that is a bit more resilient and adaptive than we were previously told. And the reason so many athletes and fit people, and there's many of you here, were affected by COVID and long COVID, is because we keep pushing and we neglect the regeneration, the repair, the rest, the nervous system downregulation that many of the speakers have talked about and will be talking about today. I've talked a little bit here, I've mentioned this chronic sympathetic nervous system, low-grade inflammation. So that's your adrenaline, it's your cortisol, sort of ticking away, making you do things. And even if you don't do sport, you could be the overachiever, you could be the productivity addict, those types of things. They will have a constant impact on your nervous system, especially if you don't have a regulated safety net around you. Also, overfitness, overhacking, actually depletes the immune system, and that correlates, as our good friend Dr. Olivia Lesler talked about yesterday, with this psychoneuroimmunology, which is brain, nervous system, immune system. It's all linked, and this idea that you can just take a whole load of vitamin C or black seed oil or zinc and your immune system will be fine is not actually true, and I learned that, again, the hard way. This is another picture of just showing how being busy, overdoing, neglecting the small things, not being present in your now. I had a horrible bike crash not soon afterwards and smashed my face up. And the recovery process from that was accelerated by some of the hacking therapies you see here today, but used strategically with cranial osteopathy, with co-regulation, with breath work, with the ability to check my body in to repair. So this is just telling you all about, as I've already been talking about, that we can't solve for longevity by merely tackling the biochemistry as if we were to tackle biochemistry in Petri dishes. We are not mice. Many of the interventions that are tested for longevity are done in mice. There's a few programs come out, like the ITP, which tests different interventions. Can't say that right now, but they test different interventions in humans, including things like rapamycin or metformin or other medications. But what I have noted through 22 years of clinical practice is that there's so many people that have got their life down to the T. They're the Brian Johnsons of the world. I know Brian Johnson, right? There's a rigidity, there's an inflexibility to him that comes with an added stress to the nervous system. One thing I'd just like to impress on you is that we are essentially, as humans, dynamic, adaptive, flexible. These are the traits that are associated with living well longer. If you think about the healthiest person you know, just think about that for a moment. Does anyone come to mind? I like to study people that seem to be thriving despite. They might be resilient. They might be the people that go to the pub and say, it's fine, I'll have a pint, I'll eat some crisps, but I'm not going to do it every day. But one thing you'll notice about them is they tend to be relationally healthy. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So we are in this paradigm shift of a time, the medicine 3.0 that Peter Attia, one of my heroes of medicine and longevity medicine, talks about, who wrote Outlive. In this concept, we all heard about it this weekend, of lifespan, moving towards this concept of healthspan, living well now, and then joyspan, which isn't so well talked about. Joyspan being the moments that matter, really being present and engaging. Yesterday, we ran a static dance, breathwork movement, and when I was doing it, I felt a little bit self-aware, because we all have some kind of voice in our ear, and my mum was in my ear going, you went to medical school and you did this and you did that, and now you're dancing around like a lunatic on stage. But what I've actually realized is that the healthiest people do that. They're really in themselves. They're really in their body. They kind of flow. They have this sort of framework of what I now see as ego dissolution. So think of this for a moment. Ego dissolution is a longevity harmonizer. When you are in flow, when you're in connection, when you're not thinking about all the things that you have to do and all your problems and all those relational problems, you are in flow. And this, by the way, is why substances, psychedelics, and breathwork have become now reframed as longevity therapeutics. And do you know why that is? It's because not just because they impact the brain to increase things like brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is essentially making your brain cells sprout and talk to each other. We have flexible, neuroflexible, dynamic, buildable brains. That's part of the paradigm shift. We used to think once we had a head injury, a neurodegenerative condition, that is it. We now know that the brain can repair itself if given the right tools. Breathwork alone won't do it. You need to have certain fuels, nutrients, micronutrients, a good diet, etc., polyphenols, nootropics, some nootropics like GPC, choline, SAMe, B vitamins. Follow Bredesen. Dale Bredesen talks a lot about protocols that really support neurodegeneration. But breathwork and psychedelics, there was a Nature paper that's fascinating, and you should look at, I wrote about it on Instagram, showing for the first time, if you gave mice, they gave them a hero dose of psilocybin, the magic mushrooms, and they followed them. And what they noted, they were hallucinating, they were kind of running around. But the big thing that made it look like a geroprotective intervention, i.e. it can protect you as you age, is they became more buff, their skin improved, their hair improved. And the authors were like, we weren't expecting this. We weren't expecting a psychedelic substance, a mushroom, to improve mice hair fur and skin texture. They also looked happier. So this is what I want to talk to you today. I'd love a show of hands. Who here is a biohacker? We've got some biohackers. Who here is a bioharmonizer? So it's nice to identify as something, but I'm much more into the BioHarmony side of things nowadays. But performance optimization, of which I spent a lot of years chasing, taught me precision. And I take that precision into the way I practice today. I look at all my patients' labs in big detail. I follow them. The previous speaker was talking about trends. It's the trends that matter, not the one-off data points with your surge in cortisol or your surge in testosterone or your surge in prolactin, a brain inflammation hormone. We are dynamic. Remember, go back to that. Not everything is static. Certain things are more static than others, like iron levels, for example. But wearable data is super important in looking at trends and bioharmony. I'll come back to that regarding heart rate variability. But I have seen this obsession that comes with biohacking really actually have a detrimental effect on some of my patients' life. Because remember, it is and potentially can be a cross-addiction, right? And in that, it's an escape. It's a checking out from your life. It's an absence. It's not a presence. So when I've mentioned here, just to reflect on, that biohacking often measures, but BioHarmony feels. And I think today we often lack a lack of feeling. So the concept of emotional health as a control layer. I remember reading Tim Noakes' book when I was an athlete called The Central Governor. He wrote a book about the central governor hypothesis. And that became relevant to me as an athlete because I'm like, well, how can I override the pain signals? How can I override the pain in my legs telling me to go to sleep and not keep running? But then I realized that you can, because the central governor is the brain, and until it reaches really high levels, you can to some extent override it, but not forever. So if we talk about emotional health, we think about how do you measure emotional health? And I was given some a moment to reflect on this when this hero of mine of longevity medicine, and I say that because he's very credible, he's very thorough, and he doesn't tend to sell anything, which I love from a famous doctor. He wrote a book called Outlive, and he's tried every longevity protocol and hack in the world. He's obsessed with different supplements, keto, fasting, exercise, VO2 max enhancement, the ability to deliver oxygen to the tissues. But in 2021, he broke. He broke because his dedication to the cause of his self as a biohacking longevity project caught up with him. And he describes beautifully in his book, the last chapter, there was a moment where his wife called him, and his wife is a trained intensive care nurse, and she called him up, and he was on a work trip. And she said, Peter, our son is on the floor, he's fitting, and I don't know what to do. I think he has a temperature, and I'm slightly panicked, what do I do? And he said, well, darling, you're a nurse, you know what to do, just call 911. And hung up because his work meeting was impending. And then there was a moment of reflection literally a few days later, because the child was admitted to intensive care, and he didn't go home. He didn't go home to check his child was okay. He outsourced that emotion to his wife in the hospital. And in that, some days later, he developed an inner rage, and he ended up beating up a car park attendant because he was so guilty by the inability of himself to check out of the work addiction I have to achieve. I have to just do this one more meeting. And he couldn't let himself fall into the concept of loving and cherishing this child of his who was very sick. A few months later, he was talking with his psychiatrist, Paul Conti, who is an incredible psychiatrist. I encourage you to read his work. And he ended up going to the Bridge, which is a rehab center. Not many people know this. He does talk about it. And the fast-forward point is he spent 2 weeks there and then subsequently another 3 weeks and became very aware of how emotional health as a driver to his health was really fundamental. And he talks about this. The last chapter of his book is very important to read. And some of the pillars of emotional health are here. It's your relationships, the strength of your relationships, not your social media relationships, not your WhatsApp groups, the ones where you look people in the eye and you feel seen, heard, connected. You feel there's this human connection. And we all came across this during COVID when we were disconnected, some of you more so than others that weren't around family. It's this sense of purpose. We've talked about that quite a lot over the weekend. But furthermore, it's this emotional regulation. It's what he couldn't do, and it's what I have done, and many of the mums or dads here when you're on edge, you're feeling a bit stressed and burnt out. It's you're shouting at your child when you're like, oh my God, I shouldn't have done that. But you did that because you were on edge. It was the straw that broke the camel's back. So this ability to emotionally regulate can be trained. It can be trained through some of the things we've done over the weekend, through breath work, through physical fitness, gentle physical fitness, through yoga, through red light. All of these things can help you by building a buffer, by teaching your system, apply the stress, and then recover from the stress and build a resilient system. There's one thing at the end here, which is a key pillar of emotional health that many of us have in some form or other, and it's addiction. And addiction to many, and I worked in addiction at the Priory Hospital in London and saw some horrendous cases of people ending up taking their own life through addiction. And it doesn't have to be drugs. It could be work. It can be, we've talked a lot about digital addiction now, the dopamine hits. These phones are wired to make us addicted, to buy things, to get that hit. We are dopamine driven. And sometimes it's really hard to rise above with yourself and say, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to reset, as it were. But other forms of addiction that are very common in my clinical practice, food addiction, self-soothing is a word of, as I've mentioned down here, which I'm well aware of in my own life, having used food, exercise, multiple biohacks, multiple bioprops, as they call it. My friend Bonnie will laugh at me because my bag is full of little props, just in cases, activated charcoal, NAC. I'm sure I've got like a red light probe in there. All these different things that keep me feeling safe. But the work is stepping away from that for a moment and saying, okay, what happens if? And we use that in treatment of obsessive-compulsive disorder. It's this process of gradual exposure, so gradual discomfort. And then you teach the signal to the body is, oh, actually I'm okay here. And then you move away so that you reduce your reliance on all of these little things. I was going to give you a little story from clinical practice, but I think we've talked a little bit about this. A biomarker of nervous system regulation and emotional health are many things. Number one, cortisol regulation. So it's often, to get the buy-in from patients, I would do a cortisol test like the Dutch test, which shows a nice, healthy cortisol awakening response and sort of flatline, and then it lowers toward the evening. But in reality, what I see in a lot of people, high demand, high-doing, high-functioning individuals, is that initially, when you're in this drive phase, you get this massive cortisol awakening response. So your cortisol looks up here. And that can be augmented by caffeine or all these, I've done this, all these stacks that we take in the morning, which are stimulating our system. It's the NAD precursors like NMN. It's the caffeine. It's the some of the other nootropics, GPC, that can be stimulating to the system. Tyrosine, a dopamine precursor, is also sympathetically stimulating. So we see this big up, and then we see a crash. And that can be reflected as like an afternoon, like a complete fatigue. And then we get a peak at night. So what's happening? You're up in the morning, getting up and going, stacking all the hacks, getting out the door, super functioning, super focused all day. And then you crash in the afternoon, unless you have, like I do, an MCT, ketone, blah, blah, coffee. And then you come up a bit, and then your cortisol's too high at night to sleep. So you're not checking into the deep and regenerative sleep that you need. So what I've said here is that when I work with patients, I often spend a lot of time with them initially. And we look at the data, and the data informs the life, the pattern. And I see very similar things. I see HRV, if I look at the Oura Ring or the Whoop, the HRV trends is too much of the sympathetic stimulation. So the HRV level in MS is low. They often don't sleep well, or they're oversleeping. The other side of that high cortisol, by the way, in the morning is low cortisol, and that is the adrenal insufficiency. That's symptoms of burnout. I don't like to use adrenal fatigue because I think the body is far more resilient and adaptive, but you do get a phase of burnout where the body just goes, hang on a sec, central governor talking to the adrenals all the time, boom, 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 shed out all these stress hormones, and it realizes stress hormones in excess over time are catabolic. They break you down. The only thing they don't break down is fat. So you end up with a fat belly, but you end up catabolic anywhere else. So I often caution people. So it's a conversation about the data, how it informs your life, and what you can involve in your life, and what you can lessen in your life and schedule in to protect yourself. And I have said here, your body is not a biohacking project. And this, as we started with, relates back to embodiment. It's the ability to be with yourself, in yourself, and to have compassion for yourself. My beautiful friend Stephanie is talking about compassionate inquiry right now, which is a wonderful method that she developed alongside Gabor Mate, which helps you explore your inner world and how that relates to how your hormones, your nervous system, and your stress hormones are functioning. So quick about BioHarmony framework, starting with awareness, noticing on a day-to-day basis how you feel in any given moment. Safety and regulation. That's actually saying, you know when people ask you if you're like, yeah, I'm fine. This is actually saying, do you know what, today I'm not fine. And then seeing the people that care to help you make a difference and how they do that. It's rhythm and recovery. It's having similar patterns, but allowing time for, like this weekend, staying out late. Your body's meant to do that. We're meant to go to war sometimes, but then retreat back to the cave. The problem at the moment, we're in a chronic state of war. So this medicine 3.0 as relational, longitudinal, that's trends and patterns in your biodata, but it's emotionally literate. It's not staying in the narrative of what happened to you. It's acknowledging what happened to you, acknowledging that you can rise above if you develop a support system, but you have to acknowledge some of the past in order to move through it. This is why I've ended up here today, because Tini, the organizer, wonderful friend of ours, is at the front there. She came as part of our Living Longevity retreat with my friend Boniface, who's going to come up in a second and just introduce himself. We were the only ones that kept going to the top of the mountain. That's why no one else from the retreat is in that photo, but the other photo is of us all dancing semi-naked under a waterfall. I won't go through this, but I'm happy to share this slide if any of you want to take pictures. It's talking about the domain of emotional health and what it means to check into it, safety and regulation of the nervous system, this idea of metabolic calm, that your stress hormone levels are linked to your blood sugar levels. This is one thing you notice. I would wake up and I had a CGM on my arm, and I'd be at a 6, 7, and I hadn't eaten anything. And then I would eat something, and my blood sugar would come down. Because insulin comes in, it sweeps the sugar out of the bloodstream, because cortisol is a glucocorticoid. It shoves blood sugar into your blood system to get you up and going. Eating insulin takes it out of the blood. Connection and meaning. Knowing that there is a relationship between your connection and your relationships and your immune system, and that belonging buffers stress, and purpose improves adherence with your rhythms and your day-to-days. And then one last one about inflammation repair. Note that where we got to the state yesterday after the breath work, that deep rest and repair, where the monkey mind has gone offline, when you're in the moment and you're just being, that is regenerative state. That is what ends up being your longevity, your ability to regenerate. I don't have time to go through that, but we're just going to finish. One of us is going to come up stage. I want you to have a takeaway about this concept of somatic practice on a daily basis. So the first one is orientating. Sorry, there's a typo there. And what that means is putting your phone down for a second when you're in your world in the morning and looking up and looking out. They call it panoramic vision. If your eyes scan the panorama, then your nervous systems get the signal to, look, it's safe, and you get a vagal nerve stimulation. The next one is we started with, and we're going to do this now. So just bear with me 1 second. I'm going to hand over to Boniface. You're going to do a physiological sigh.
Right. Can you hear me? Is that working? Okay, amazing. Yesterday at the end of one of the talks, we were looking at how is the fastest way to use humming to down-regulate yourself. And I didn't invent this, as you know, it's been used for thousands of years. And it's the sound of the frequency of O, which is why we're going to do a big O. This is where I want to go. Try and go as deep as you can in your throat. O, 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 O. Try and find here, okay? So I want you to take one big breath in through your nose. Breathe out through your nose. And on the next one, take a big breath in again. And we're going to do big O. O. In this 10 seconds, you get more discharge of your anterior branch of vagus nerve, which is the socially engaging, co-regulating, parasympathetic charge that you can do in yourself. There's nothing better. Obviously, life will take over and you go back up, but you know you can have that. Another little trick we have, which is really easy, when you feel that something is triggering you, take your left hand from me like this. Take your right finger and very gently just stroke the inside, just at the limit between the back of your hand and the front of your hand. You can see there's a little limit here, you can see it. And this is, for some reason, because of the duality of the texture of the skin here, informing your body, again, to down-regulate. It's better to leave your eyes closed, to open them just one way, one the other way. And again, 10 seconds, your whole nervous system will come down.
I'm going to leave you with this concept now that you have the capacity there to down-regulate yourself and with others. But I want you to think about this concept of living longevity, and that longevity is merely a side effect of living well consistently. But there's one caveat to that. Have compassion for yourself when you fall off the wagon if you're out late. Your body is adaptive and responsive and can deal with that. I see far too many people guilting themselves and beating themselves up for behaviors. So move into life with compassion, repair, co-regulation, and note that regeneration is very possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well done.